Tonight, I've gathered some of the darkest and most chilling true horror stories from across the internet. Stories whispered in forgotten forums, buried in late-night Reddit threads, and shared by people who swore they'd never speak of it again. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Are you lying in bed with the lights off, listening during a midnight drive, or maybe you're just trying to make it through the night shift? Get comfortable, put your headphones in, and whatever you do, don't look behind you. Let's begin. I was 26 when I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment, just outside the city. The complex was older but affordable, tucked at the end of a quiet road that bordered a wooded area. It wasn't glamorous, but after a rough breakup and an expensive lease in the city, it felt like a fresh start. Peaceful, solitary, safe. For the first month, everything was uneventful. I spent most evenings unpacking boxes or watching shows with the windows cracked open to let in the cool spring air. Occasionally, I'd hear wildlife from the woods, birds, frogs, the distant bark of a dog. That peaceful soundtrack became part of my routine until it changed. One night, around 2 a.m., I was awoken by a strange sound. Not an animal, not a branch breaking. It was a click, then another, repeated, slow, faint, but deliberate. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. Click, click, click. It was coming from the back door, the one that led to a small concrete patio facing the woods. My heart picked up. I lived alone. No one should be at that door. I crept into the kitchen, barefoot and cautious, and peered through the blinds. There was someone crouched down outside my door. He was low to the ground, facing the handle, and doing something with his hands. At first, I thought it was a flashlight, but it wasn't. It was something thinner, glinting in the moonlight. He was picking the lock. I gasped before I could stop myself, and backed away from the blinds too fast, knocking a glass off the counter. It shattered. I froze. Outside, I heard the man stand up fast. His silhouette bolted from the door and disappeared into the woods. I called the police, hands trembling. They arrived 15 minutes later, searched the area, and took a statement, but without a clear description or damage to the lock. There wasn't much they could do, probably just someone casing the place. One of the officers said, "Keep the doors locked, and maybe install a camera." The next day, I bought a doorbell cam, and had a friend help me install motion-activated floodlights on the back patio. I tried to convince myself it was a one-off, a close call, nothing more. But it didn't stop. A few nights later, the motion light kicked on at 1:43 a.m. I checked the app on my phone and saw nothing, just the empty patio. But when I reviewed the footage frame by frame, I caught it, a hand slipping just out of view. Whoever it was had been there again. That night, I didn't sleep. Over the next week, I started noticing things inside the apartment, subtle changes. A drawer slightly open, a cabinet door swung wide. At first I blamed myself. Maybe I'd forgotten, maybe I was overtired. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. I came home from work to find the bedroom closet door ajar. Inside, folded neatly on the floor, was a piece of cloth I didn't own. It was a hood, black, lightweight, like something a burglar might wear. There was no tag, no dust. It was placed there, deliberately. I lost it. I called the cops again. They searched the place, and said there were no signs of forced entry. Maybe a friend left it. The officer suggested. A prank. I knew better. Someone had been inside while I was gone, and they'd left a message. I bought a second lock for the door. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. I stopped opening the windows at night. But nothing prepares you for the moment when fear becomes reality. The night it happened was quiet, unnaturally quiet. No owls, no wind. Even the usual creaking of the old building seemed to fall still, like the whole world was holding its breath. I was in bed, phone in hand, watching the live feed from my back patio camera, something I'd started doing every night before falling asleep. For the first time in days, it showed nothing but stillness. No movement, no shadows, just the faint glow of the motion light illuminating the concrete slab. and the edge of the woods. I turned off the phone and closed my eyes, exhausted from constant vigilance. But I couldn't have been asleep long, maybe an hour at most, when something pulled me back awake. A creak. It wasn't from outside. It was from inside the apartment, somewhere near the kitchen. I held my breath. Then another creak. Closer. My skin prickled with cold terror. Someone was in the apartment. Somehow, despite 2 locks and security lights, they'd gotten in, and this time, they weren't sneaking around. They were coming straight for me. I grabbed the knife from under my pillow and swung my legs out of bed, creeping toward the bedroom door. My phone was still on the nightstand. I turned the screen on, 2:14 a.m., and quickly texted 911, my thumbs shaking so badly, it took 3 tries to type intruder in my apartment. Just then, I heard breathing, heavy, slow, just beyond the bedroom door. I raised the knife, barely able to keep my grip. My whole body trembled. As the doorknob turned slowly, a tiny squeal of metal grinding against metal. Then the door burst open. A figure rushed inside, tall, broad and fast, face obscured by a black hood and mask. He slammed into me, knocking the knife from my hand. I hit the floor hard, head spinning from the impact, and scrambled backward as he reached down for the blade. I kicked him in the knee, hard enough to knock him sideways, giving me just enough time to grab the lamp from my dresser and smash it into his shoulder. He grunted, stumbled, and I bolted, barefoot, straight out of the apartment, screaming as loud as I could. I barely made it to the 2nd floor landing before I collapsed. A neighbor flung their door open, lights came on, voices yelled, footsteps thundered, and just like that, he was gone, vanished back into the shadows of the stairwell. The cops arrived minutes later, guns drawn, searching the building and the woods behind it. They found no trace of him, but they found what he'd left behind. Inside my apartment, stuffed behind the couch, was a backpack filled with zip ties, duct tape, a roll of plastic sheeting, and a bottle of some kind of anesthetic. He hadn't broken in to rob me. He hadn't even come just to scare me. He came to take his time. They rushed me to the hospital that night, with a mild concussion, deep bruising across my ribs, and a dislocated shoulder from the struggle. But I was alive, barely, because I woke up. The man was never caught. No fingerprints, no ID, nothing but that bag of tools, and the memories he carved into me. I moved the day I was discharged, changed my number, deleted every social account, but I never stopped looking over my shoulder, never stopped checking the windows, never stopped sleeping with something sharp under my pillow. When I was 28, I started working as a caretaker at Green Hill Nursing Home, a quiet rural facility nestled in a peaceful valley far from town. It seemed like a perfect fit. The residents were gentle, the staff friendly, and the peaceful setting felt comforting. But despite its outward calm, Green Hill always felt strangely unsettling after dark. My duties were simple: check in on residents throughout the night, assist anyone who needed help, and ensure the building remained secure. Initially, things seemed normal enough, but soon I started noticing odd occurrences, small subtle things that grew harder to dismiss. It began with room 17, an empty bedroom at the end of the east hallway, long unused due to plumbing issues. Every night during my rounds, I'd find the door slightly open, despite repeatedly locking it. I convinced myself the lock was faulty, until one night, as I approached the door, I distinctly heard a soft rhythmic humming drifting faintly from inside. Curiosity overtook caution, and I slowly pushed the door open wider, peering nervously inside. The room stood empty, silent, shadows dancing gently in faint moonlight. Confused but unsettled, I shut and locked the door again firmly, quickly moving on. After that night, tension tightened with every shift. The humming repeated randomly, always from room 17, always ceasing abruptly whenever I opened the door. Other staff dismissed my concerns, blaming old pipes or imagination, yet my instinct screamed otherwise. Someone, or something occupied that room. Then came a night, when subtle disturbances turned far more alarming. While checking on residents, I heard frantic whispers drifting down the hallway, Sharp, anxious voices filled with urgency. Following the sound quickly, I arrived at room 17 again, pulse racing sharply. The whispers stopped instantly upon my approach. Summoning courage, I unlocked the door and stepped inside, heart hammering violently. The room felt colder than usual, air heavy with unspoken tension. Suddenly, a sharp knock sounded from inside the adjoining bathroom door. Clear, unmistakable, deliberate. "Hello," I called shakily. Stepping toward the bathroom, silence responded. Slowly, carefully, I pushed the bathroom door open, my flashlight illuminating the small, empty space. Relief washed over me momentarily, until I turned back toward the main room, my blood freezing instantly. There, standing quietly near the window, was an elderly woman I'd never seen before, dressed in a faded nightgown, her gaze fixed intently outside. My throat tightened in shock. "Ma'am," I asked nervously, "are you lost? Can I help you?" She didn't answer, only continued staring silently into the darkness. Carefully approaching, I repeated my question, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Her skin felt ice cold beneath my fingertips. Slowly, eerily, she turned toward me, eyes distant, hollow. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered softly, voice chillingly calm. "They won't let you leave." Terrified, I stepped back quickly, heart racing. Suddenly, she smiled slowly, a strange knowing smile, then stepped silently backward, fading quietly into darkness, disappearing completely. Panic surged violently through me. Who was she? Where had she gone? Before I could process further, my radio crackled sharply, my coworker's anxious voice, cutting through urgently. "Where are you?" he demanded nervously. "Something strange is happening. Residents keep reporting seeing someone unfamiliar, wandering the hallways. An elderly woman, but I can't find her anywhere." Chills raced down my spine, realization striking sickeningly. Whoever, or whatever, I'd just seen in room 17, wasn't just my imagination. It was something real, quietly haunting the halls, waiting silently in the shadows. I rushed out of room 17, still shaken, the memory of the old woman's empty eyes and cryptic warning etched deeply into my thoughts. The hallway now felt longer than usual, the fluorescent lights above flickering faintly. I met my coworker Eric at the nurse's station. He looked pale and tense. "She's not just in your head," he said quietly. Before I could speak, 2 residents swear they saw her in their rooms. One said she was standing at the foot of his bed, just watching. My stomach twisted. Eric and I went back to review the security footage. The cameras inside the rooms didn't work for privacy reasons, but the hallways were covered. We fast-forwarded through the last hour, and found it at 3:12 a.m. The camera near room 17 caught a blurry figure gliding across the hall. It was unmistakably a woman in a hospital gown, barefoot, moving unnaturally slow, and then suddenly, fast-forwarding across the camera's view. In a blink, we both leaned back, frozen. "That's impossible," Eric muttered. "The sensor would have triggered a motion alert." I didn't get any. We filed an internal report, but we already knew what the response would be. Faulty wiring, old equipment, technical glitches. That's what they always said. The next night, things escalated. Around 3:30 a.m., the emergency call bell lit up from room 12, Mr. Halverson's room. He was one of our more fragile residents, barely mobile. I jogged down the hall and opened the door. He was sitting straight up in bed, something he hadn't done in weeks. His eyes were wide, locked on the corner of the room. "She was here," he whispered. "The woman in the gown. She said she used to live here. She wanted me to remember her name, but I couldn't." I glanced toward the corner, empty. I helped calm him down and left his TV on for background noise, then returned to the office, where Eric sat looking up old facility records. He waved me over. "This place wasn't always a nursing home," he said quietly. "Before the remodel, this was a long-term psychiatric hospital. In the 70s, a fire broke out in the East Wing, right where room 17 is now. Multiple patients died. There's one name that comes up more than once. Evelyn Marsh." I felt my blood go cold. Evelyn Marsh. That name hadn't come from Mr. Halverson. I'd heard it whispered somewhere else, Just the night before, faintly, as I stood outside room 17, Eric found an old photo, grainy and black and white, a group of nurses and patients outside the facility. In the back row, barely visible, was a pale woman with dark eyes, dressed in white. It was her. Neither of us said anything for a while. What could we say? That night, I avoided room 17 entirely. I was doing a final walkthrough before my shift ended, when I noticed something strange. Every single door down the east hallway was open, wide open, even the ones we always kept locked. And at the very end, room 17's door slowly creaked shut, by itself. I turned and left the hallway without looking back. I turned in my resignation the next day. A few weeks later, I got a call from Eric. The administration had decided to convert the east hallway into storage space. After renovations began, they discovered something buried in the wall behind room 17. A scorched medical bracelet sealed in the concrete, with the name barely legible, Evelyn Marsh. I never went back. When I was 24, I started working night shifts as a security guard at Crestview Shopping Mall, a small struggling complex located just outside the city limits. The mall had fallen on hard times recently, with many stores closed and entire sections abandoned. It had become a quiet, eerie place after dark. My shift started at midnight, and I was responsible for patrolling empty hallways, checking locked doors, and making sure no one lingered after closing. At first I enjoyed the solitude. The emptiness was peaceful, almost relaxing, but soon something began to feel off. It started subtly, strange sounds echoing through the empty corridors, faint whispers that seemed to drift from darkened stores. Initially, I convinced myself it was just the mall settling, or perhaps my imagination playing tricks from fatigue. But then, things grew harder to dismiss. One night, during my routine patrol, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye, inside a vacant clothing store. Immediately, my heart jumped, and I swung my flashlight in that direction, expecting to catch a trespasser. But there was nothing, only mannequins standing motionless in the shadows. I stared uneasily, convinced something had moved, but saw only lifeless figures staring back silently, shaken but determined. I continued patrolling. As I passed the food court, another noise broke the silence, a soft giggle, clearly audible, childlike. My blood ran cold instantly. I turned quickly, flashlight trembling slightly, as I scanned the darkened tables and chairs. "Hello," I called cautiously, my voice echoing faintly. Silence answered back, thick and oppressive, heart racing. I stepped forward slowly, carefully examining every corner, but there was no one. After that, anxiety tightened its grip. Nightly, each patrol became filled with dread, every noise magnified by fear. I began hearing footsteps trailing behind me, faint at first, then clearer, always stopping abruptly when I turned around. Each time I checked, nothing appeared but silent, empty hallways. Then came the night, when fear turned to true panic. As I approached an old electronics store, long abandoned, I heard the sound of static crackling softly from inside, like an old television had suddenly come to life. My pulse quickened sharply. Cautiously, I entered the darkened store, flashlight beam shaking nervously. Inside, dozens of old TVs lined shelves, screens dark and lifeless. Confused, I approached slowly, examining them closely. Then suddenly, one television flickered on sharply, filling the store with harsh static noise and pale flickering light. Terrified, I stumbled backward, heart pounding violently. As I turned to run, movement caught my eye again. Something darted swiftly behind the shelves. Adrenaline surged through me as I shouted, "Who's there? Show yourself." No response came, only static buzzing louder from the TV, echoing hauntingly through the darkness. Panic overwhelming me, I backed out quickly, shutting the door firmly behind me, breathing heavily in relief. Just as I began to calm down, a sudden whisper drifted softly through the glass door, clear and chillingly close. "Don't leave yet. We're not done." My entire body froze with terror. Whatever was haunting this mall wasn't just my imagination. It was real, waiting quietly in shadows, determined to keep me there, trapped in the darkness, until it was finished with me. My pulse thundered violently as I stood frozen outside the electronics store, the whisper still ringing clearly in my mind. Something inside this abandoned mall was aware of me, watching from the darkness, eager to keep me there. Shaking uncontrollably, I fumbled for my radio, calling desperately to my coworker, Ben, who was monitoring security cameras from the control room. Ben, I gasped urgently, voice trembling, I'm near the electronics store. Something's in here. Did you see anything strange on the cameras? Static crackled briefly before Ben replied, sounding confused. No, nothing. I've been watching you this whole time. Are you okay? His answer chilled me even more. If Ben hadn't seen anything, had it really happened? Or was I losing my mind? Yet I knew what I heard, felt the presence clearly watching me from within that store. Suddenly, Ben's voice cut sharply over the radio again, anxious now. Wait, hold on, I think someone just moved near the food court. Stay there, I'll come down. My heart skipped painfully. No, Ben, wait. But static filled the radio again, silencing my words. Terrified, I rushed toward the food court, afraid of what Ben might find alone. As I approached, the lights above flickered erratically, shadows dancing ominously along the walls. Then I saw Ben standing motionless near the food court tables, flashlight hanging loosely at his side, staring silently into the darkness. Ben, I called softly, approaching carefully. He didn't respond, just continued staring blankly ahead, eyes wide and strangely vacant. My anxiety surged sharply. Ben, what's wrong? Slowly, mechanically, Ben raised his arm, pointing quietly toward the far corner. My flashlight trembled as I shined it nervously in that direction. My blood froze instantly. Standing quietly near a cluster of tables was a figure, pale, thin, dressed in ragged clothes, eyes dark and hollow. It smiled slowly, disturbingly calm, and then softly giggled, a childlike sound I'd heard before. Fear paralyzed me completely. Then, without warning, more laughter echoed from behind counters, stores and empty hallways, echoing eerily, surrounding us entirely. I spun around frantically, flashlight shaking violently. Figures appeared slowly, stepping calmly from shadows, pale faces illuminated dimly, eyes empty and vacant, silently smiling. We've been lonely, one whispered softly, approaching slowly, calmly. You'll stay now, won't you? Panicked, I grabbed Ben's arm firmly, yelling desperately, we have to run. Ben finally snapped from his trance, turning sharply, horror evident in his expression, as we sprinted frantically toward the mall exit. Behind us, footsteps and laughter followed closely, growing louder, more insistent. Reaching the doors, we shoved them open, stumbling into the parking lot, gasping for breath. The moment we crossed outside, laughter abruptly stopped, replaced instantly by eerie silence. Turning nervously, we stared back inside the mall, empty and still now. Nothing but darkened corridors, visible through the glass doors. Ben turned toward me shakily. Did you see them? Were they real? I nodded silently, pulse racing painfully. We reported everything, quitting our jobs immediately afterward. Weeks later, I learned the mall had closed permanently. Rumors surfaced about the mall being built over old land, a forgotten cemetery disturbed during construction. People whispered of strange sightings, unexplained disappearances, and constant turnover of security staff, but nothing was ever officially confirmed. It was supposed to be just another night shift at the gas station on the edge of town, the kind where you mop the floors, stock some shelves, and spend hours watching videos on your phone, because the foot traffic is almost non-existent after midnight. I'd taken the job because it was easy, and paid the bills, not because I expected anything exciting to happen. That night, however, everything changed. I remember checking the clock. It was exactly 2:07 a.m. when she walked in. The bell above the door chimed its usual cheerful tone, which seemed out of place in the dead of night. She was small, her coat too big for her frame, hood pulled low over her face. Something about her immediately put me on edge. Maybe it was the way she moved, hesitant, like she was trying to make as little sound as possible. She walked straight to the back of the store, her head never turning, her steps silent. I tried to go back to my video, but something about her presence made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I kept my eyes on the security mirror, watching as she stopped in front of the bathroom door, then looked around as if to make sure no one else was watching. She didn't enter the bathroom. Instead, she slipped into the employees-only storeroom next to it. My heart skipped a beat. That area was strictly off-limits to customers, filled with overstock and some expensive equipment. "Hey," I called out, my voice firmer than I felt. "You can't be back there." There was no response, just silence. I sighed, pausing my video and slipping my phone into my pocket. As I approached the storeroom, I could hear a faint sound, like someone rummaging through boxes. The door was ajar when I got there, and I pushed it open with one hand, the other ready to dial 911. "If things got out of hand, you need to come out of there," I said, trying to sound authoritative. What I saw inside wasn't at all what I expected. There wasn't just one person. There were three, two men and a woman, all dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, their faces covered by masks. One of them held a crowbar. They had been trying to pry open the safe I hadn't even realized our manager kept in the storeroom. The one with the crowbar turned to look at me, and my breath caught in my throat. There was something chilling about the way he stared, emotionless, calculating. I knew immediately that I was in danger. "Close the door," he said, his voice low. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't angry, it was calm, controlled, and somehow that made it worse. My mind raced. The phone in my pocket felt a million miles away. I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed the door shut and ran back to the counter. They didn't chase me. They didn't need to. They knew they had the upper hand. From behind the counter, I grabbed the panic button we were instructed to use only in absolute emergencies. This qualified. I pressed it hard, holding it down, praying that the police would arrive quickly. But they didn't need to come in after me. They started to leave, the way they had planned, slipping out the back door they had propped open. Before he left, the one with the crowbar turned and looked directly at the camera above the door. A cold, deliberate stare. Then he followed the others, disappearing into the darkness of the night. I stood there, shaking, unable to move until I saw the flashing lights of the police cars pulling into the parking lot. It was over, but it didn't feel like it. Not for me. The image of that man's stare haunted me, a promise of something unfinished. In the days following the robbery, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The police had arrived quickly, after I pressed the panic button, but the robbers were already gone, melting into the night with a few $1,000s. And my peace of mind. They took the store's security footage with them, which contained clear images of their faces before they had put on their masks, making it harder for the police to track them down. I was questioned, of course. The officers were sympathetic, telling me I'd done the right thing by hitting the alarm and not trying to play the hero. But their reassurances did little to comfort me. The image of the man with the crowbar, his calculating eyes, haunted my every waking moment. I kept seeing him every time I closed my eyes. I tried to go back to work a week later, thinking that keeping busy would help. It didn't. The first time the door chime rang after my shift started, I almost jumped out of my skin. It was just a regular customer, but my heart didn't get the memo. It raced like I had just run a marathon. My boss noticed my jumpiness and suggested I take some more time off. I nodded, grateful, and walked back home. I lived only a few blocks away, but every step felt like a mile. Every shadow seemed to move, and every sound made me look over my shoulder. I was a wreck. That night, as I lay in bed trying to force myself into the oblivion of sleep, I heard it, a soft creak outside my window. My apartment was on the first floor, and the sound was unmistakable. Someone was out there. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I listened as soft footsteps moved from one window to the next, testing each to see if it was locked. I had made sure they all were, but that knowledge did little to calm my racing heart. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. I waited, listening to the silence that felt almost as loud as the footsteps had. Minutes passed. Hours. Maybe. I didn't move until the first light of dawn crept through my curtains. Only then did I dare to get up and check. There was a note under my door. A piece of plain paper folded neatly. I opened it with trembling hands, and my blood ran cold when I read the two scrawled words. Nice try. It was a message. A threat. They hadn't just come for the money. They had come for me. Maybe I had seen too much, even if I couldn't identify them. Maybe they were just twisted, getting a thrill from the fear they instilled. I called the police again, handed them the note, and told them about the footsteps. They increased patrols in my area, and promised to keep an eye out. But there are only so many cops, and so many hours in the day. I knew I wasn't safe. Not really. The next few weeks were a blur of paranoia, police check-ins, and sleepless nights. I started looking for new apartments in a different city, somewhere I could start over, somewhere I could feel safe again. On my last day in town, as I packed up the last of my belongings, I found another note. This one was inside my locked apartment, placed right on the kitchen counter. Don't come back. I didn't plan to. I left town that day, leaving behind my job, my friends, and a part of myself. I started over, but the fear never completely left me. It lingered, a shadow at the edge of my vision, a whisper in the silence of the night. I never learned why they targeted me, why they followed me, or how they got into my apartment. When I rented the cabin off an obscure online listing, it was intended as a solitary retreat, a place to finish my doctoral thesis without the distractions of city life. It stood alone, nestled against a dense pine forest somewhere in the northern Rockies, miles from the nearest neighbor, which was exactly what I wanted. The owner, a gruff old man named Carl, mentioned over the phone that it was peaceful to a fault, and made me promise to take care of the place. The drive took longer than I expected, winding roads climbing into the mountains, the signal on my phone flickering out. Long before I reached the gravel track that led to the cabin, it was already evening by the time I arrived, the sun dipping low behind the trees, casting long shadows. The cabin itself was rustic, but well built, with a stone chimney, and logs that looked like they could withstand a century. I unpacked, settled in, and decided to take a quick walk around the property before dark. That's when I noticed something odd. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt, not covered by the last rain, leading around to the back of the cabin. Curious, I followed them, only to find they ended abruptly at the back door. Unsettled, I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows, telling myself Carl might have been doing some last-minute maintenance before my arrival. Inside, the cabin felt colder than it should have for a summer evening. I made a mental note to check the fireplace and heating system in the morning. I spent the night unpacking my things and setting up my work area. It was late when I finally went to bed, the isolation of the place creeping into my bones. I found it harder to fall asleep than I anticipated. Every little sound seemed amplified in the silent cabin. In the middle of the night, I woke suddenly, my heart pounding, not sure what had disturbed me. The cabin was silent, suffocatingly so. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed that the door to my bedroom was ajar, even though I was certain I had closed it before going to bed. Heart in my throat, I got up to close it, when a sudden noise from outside stopped me cold. A car engine, muffled by distance, but unmistakably fading away down the mountain road. I rushed to the window, but it was too dark to see anything. The next morning, I found my nerves frayed. I tried to focus on my work, but the unease from the night before lingered. By midday, I decided to clear my head with a hike through the surrounding woods. It was during this walk that I discovered the first sign that something was truly wrong. Not far from the cabin, hidden under a loose pile of leaves, I stumbled upon a small, weather-beaten sign, nailed to a tree. It was old and partially obscured by moss, but I could make out the faded lettering. No trespassing, Modiasic government property. Confused and more than a little anxious, I hurried back to the cabin to check the rental agreement Carl had sent me. There was no mention of government land, or any restrictions on accessing the property. Feeling a growing sense of dread, I decided to call Carl for clarification. The phone rang endlessly. No answer. That night, I double-checked all the locks, a small baseball bat by my bedside, just in case. As I tried to sleep, the isolation of the cabin no longer felt peaceful but oppressive, as if the forest itself was closing in. Around midnight, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch jolted me awake. Not animal steps. These were slow, deliberate, heavy. Someone was outside, walking back and forth along the wooden planks. I grabbed the bat and crept to the window. Peering through the curtains, I saw a figure in the moonlight. It was a man, large and imposing, pacing methodically. He stopped and seemed to look directly at the window, where I hid. Frozen, I watched as he reached into his coat, pulling out something metallic. A flashlight. No, it was too large, too angular. A cold realization washed over me as he turned and walked back towards the woods, the moonlight glinting off the object in his hand. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a bolt cutter. The image of the man with the bolt cutter haunted me. As I lay in bed, wide-eyed and alert, every creak of the cabin's aging structure sounded like a footstep, every gust of wind like a whisper. After hours of restless vigilance, I decided that staying in bed was no longer an option. If I was going to defend myself, I needed to be proactive. With the baseball bat clutched tightly in one hand, I crept through the cabin, making my way to the kitchen. There I found the largest knife in the drawer, and a flashlight. Armed and somewhat reassured, I checked every possible entry point again, reinforcing them as best as I could. As dawn broke, the tension hadn't eased. The early light did little to dispel the terror of the night. I realized I needed to leave, get to the nearest town, and contact the authorities. But first I wanted evidence. I decided to set up my camera with a motion sensor pointing towards the porch. If that man or anyone else came back, I'd have proof. Before I could set up the camera, a loud bang at the front door startled me. It was a forceful, demanding knock. Heart pounding, I approached cautiously, knife in hand. Another series of knocks, more urgent this time, echoed through the cabin. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "Police, open up," a stern voice replied. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by suspicion. Why were the police here? I hadn't managed to call them yet. Moving to the side window, I peeked out. A police cruiser was parked in front of the cabin, which eased some of my anxiety. I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. The man on the porch was in uniform, looking official, but something in his demeanor didn't sit right with me. He noticed my hesitation. "We received a call about suspicious activity around this property. Mind if I come in and take a look?" Suspicious activity. It was almost laughable, considering what I'd experienced. Yet, there was no reason for an officer to lie. "Can I see your badge?" I asked, trying to mask my nervousness. He flashed his badge quickly, too quickly for me to get a good look, but it was enough to make me unlatch the door. As he stepped inside, I noticed his eyes darting around, assessing. "Where's your vehicle?" he asked. "I didn't drive. A friend dropped me off," I lied, not fully trusting him yet. His gaze lingered on the camera in my hand. "What happened here last night?" he continued, his tone more inquisitive than concerned. I explained about the trespasser, the bolt cutters, and the footsteps. He listened, nodding, jotting down notes. Then his radio crackled to life, startling us both. He answered, stepping outside to talk. I took advantage of the moment to close the door and watch him through the window. He was tense, speaking in hushed tones. Then he ended his call and walked back towards the cabin, his expression unreadable. When he returned, his demeanor had changed. "Look, it's probably just some locals messing with you. Happens all the time around here. I'll do a sweep of the area, but you should be fine." His reassurance did little to calm me. He left, and I watched his cruiser disappear down the trail. The morning had worn into afternoon, and I felt the walls of the cabin closing in. I packed a small bag with essentials, grabbed the camera and my phone, and decided to hike to the nearest road to catch a signal and call for a real police check. Halfway down the trail, I turned to take one last look at the cabin and froze. There at the edge of the clearing, hidden partially by trees, was the man from the night before. The bolt cutter lay beside him on the ground, and he was watching me intently. Fear turned my legs to jelly, but I knew I couldn't go back to the cabin. With a deep, steadying breath, I turned and ran as fast as I could down the trail, not stopping until I reached the main road hours later. Exhausted and terrified, from a borrowed phone at a gas station, I called the police. The real police. They listened, interested especially in my interaction with the officer. When they escorted me back to the cabin for investigation, we discovered the unsettling truth. The man posing as a police officer was linked to a series of break-ins and assaults in remote cabins across the state. He was no cop. He was a predator who used his disguise to gain access to isolated individuals. I never returned to that cabin. It started with a road trip. My best friend Trevor and I had been planning it for years. A coast-to-coast drive, just the two of us, hitting as many back roads and small towns as we could manage. No highways, no chain restaurants, no big cities, just the open road, paper maps, roadside diners, and cheap motels. We were 3 weeks in when things went wrong. We were somewhere in the Midwest. I couldn't even tell you which state. We'd passed through so many towns they'd started to blur together. I remember cornfields, endless stretches of two-lane road, and skies that looked like they went on forever. It was peaceful, until the GPS stopped working. Trevor had been navigating, while I drove, and when we realized we had no signal, and the road signs had thinned out, we figured we'd missed a turn somewhere. The last actual town we passed was called Ashton Ridge, population maybe 300, quaint, a general store, a gas station, a post office that looked abandoned. That was nearly an hour ago. We debated turning back, but the tank was still half full, and the road ahead curved through a narrow forest that looked too perfect to resist. It loops back to the main road, Trevor said, pointing to the map with his usual confidence. Worst case, we camp somewhere. We never made it to that loop. The road narrowed after a few miles, the trees closing in on both sides. The sun had started setting, and long shadows stretched across the cracked asphalt. We passed a rusted road sign that had no text, just a faint arrow pointing straight ahead. Okay, that's weird, I muttered. Trevor chuckled nervously. Maybe it's just faded. 10 minutes later, the pavement turned to gravel. We didn't say much after that. A few minutes later, we saw it, a figure walking along the side of the road, facing away from us. He was tall, hunched slightly, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. No backpack, no gear, just walking. I slowed down, hesitated. Should we ask if he's okay? Trevor looked uneasy. I don't know, man. Something about the guy made my stomach twist. But as we passed him, he turned his head slowly and looked at us. I mean, really looked, like he knew us, like he'd been waiting. His face was pale, eyes too wide, his mouth pressed into a tight line. We kept driving, but less than a mile ahead, the road ended. No warning, no signs, just a sudden wall of trees and dirt, like the road had been swallowed up by the forest. We both sat in silence. Guess we're turning around, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We backed up, gravel crunching under the tires, but when we turned around, the man was gone. No sign of him on the road, no place to hide, no sound, just silence. We didn't talk as we drove back. Faster this time. The sun was almost gone, and the forest seemed darker than it should have been. Just when we thought we were in the clear, Trevor shouted, "Stop!" I slammed on the brakes. Our headlights had caught something up ahead. A car. No, a truck was parked across the road sideways, blocking the way out. It looked old and beat up, but the engine was running. No one was visible inside. Is this some kind of joke? I asked, trying to keep calm. Trevor shook his head. It wasn't there before. We didn't pass it. I reached for my phone. Still no signal. Trevor tried his. Dead. We waited. A minute. Then two. Okay, I said, swallowing hard. I'm gonna talk to whoever's in there. Just be ready to jump in the driver's seat if anything happens. I stepped out, slowly approaching the truck, my heart pounding in my ears. I kept my hands up, trying to appear non-threatening. Hey, I called out. We're just trying to get back to the main road. Can you move your truck? No answer. As I got closer, I saw the driver's door was wide open. No one inside. Keys still in the ignition. The dashboard lights blinking like a heartbeat. I peeked into the cab. Empty. But the floor was stained dark. Something sticky. I didn't look too closely. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the woods behind us. Then another. Not a gunshot. More like branches breaking. Something big was moving out there. I ran back to the car, breathing hard. "We need to go," I said. Now, Trevor jumped out, helping me push the truck enough to squeeze past on the shoulder. As we did, I saw something else on the side of the truck, scratched deep into the paint. Turn around. We didn't waste another second. We got back on the gravel, then pavement, then silence, but the sense of dread never left. Later, when we made it to a small motel just outside another tiny town, Trevor locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle. I didn't argue. We never figured out where we'd gone or what happened back there. But that night, Trevor pulled something from his pocket, face pale. It was a folded piece of paper. "I didn't put this there," he whispered. On it, written in shaky black marker, "You shouldn't have come this way. Next time, we won't let you leave." We didn't talk much on the drive. The next day, Trevor sat quiet, staring out the window, occasionally glancing down at the note he swore wasn't in his pocket, until we got to the motel. I tried to shake it off, chalk it up to a prank, some twisted local messing with us. But the truth was, neither of us believed that. There was something unnatural about what we experienced, like we had slipped into some forgotten place, one that wasn't supposed to exist, one that noticed us. We altered our route after that. No more back roads, no more towns with fading signs and broken streetlights. It was highways and populated gas stations from then on. And for a while, it seemed to work. The dread faded. A few laughs came back. We convinced ourselves it was over. But it wasn't. It followed us. We were 3 days from the West Coast, staying in a cheap motel outside Flagstaff, Arizona. Trevor was finally starting to sleep again. I wasn't. Something kept me up. This feeling that something was off, like someone had shifted the entire world slightly to the left, just enough that you couldn't see it unless you paid attention. And that night, I did. At 2:13 a.m., I woke to the sound of my motel room door latch clicking. I sat up instantly, heart racing. Trevor was asleep across the room, breathing heavily. The room was dimly lit by the motel sign glowing faint red through the blinds. I thought maybe it was the wind, until I saw the silhouette through the peephole. Someone was standing outside our door, not knocking, not moving, just standing there. I slowly crept to the peephole and looked out. It was a man, same black hoodie, same build, head down, hands at his sides, perfectly still. I stepped back, breath caught in my chest. I grabbed the motel phone and dialed the front desk. It rang once, then went dead. No tone, no dial sound, just silence. I turned to wake Trevor, and that's when we both heard it. A voice, right outside the door. Low, raspy, calm. "Why'd you run?" Trevor sat up instantly. We stared at each other, frozen. Then I grabbed my keys and wallet, and we booked it out the back exit. Didn't even grab our bags. Outside, the night air was cold and dry. The motel was dead silent. No cars on the road, no lights in the rooms. The office was dark, empty, like no one had ever been there to begin with. We drove, didn't stop for hours, didn't even speak until the sun came up. After that, it got worse. Every night we stayed somewhere new. Something would happen. Footsteps in the hallway, a knock on the door at exactly 2:13 a.m., a reflection in the TV when it was turned off, one that wasn't ours, a low voice humming a tune neither of us recognized, but both felt like we should. We weren't sleeping, we weren't eating, our eyes were red, skin pale. We looked like we'd survived a fire no one else saw. We finally reached the coast, a small rental house near the beach, our final stop before we went our separate ways and flew home. I thought maybe, just maybe, putting an ocean between us and that place would sever the thread. The last night in the house, we decided to sleep during the day and stay awake all night, just to be sure. 1 a.m. Silence. 1:30 a.m. The air grew heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. 2 a.m. We turned off the lights. Waited. 2:13 a.m. The bedroom door creaked open. Neither of us moved. We were staring right at it. The door slowly swung inward. The hallway beyond was pitch black. We couldn't see anything until the hallway lights flicked on by themselves. Standing at the end of the hallway was the figure. Black hoodie, pale face, hands at his sides. But this time he stepped inside. We slammed the door and held it shut. But he didn't try to open it. He whispered through the wood, "You left the road, but the road never left you." Then silence. When we finally opened the door, there was no one there, just our bags, neatly packed. By the front door, we flew home the next day, sat in separate rows, didn't talk. We never spoke again. Actually, I guess some shared experiences are too heavy for words. That was 6 years ago. Since then, I haven't driven a single back road. I don't travel much. I moved to a high-rise downtown with 24/7 security, and never let my phone lose signal. It was supposed to be the ultimate weekend getaway for me and my closest friends, Alex, Jenna, and Chris. We had planned a 3-day hike, deep into the Bell Rock Mountains, known for their breathtaking views and challenging trails. As an added thrill, local legends told of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena in the dense woods surrounding the area, which piqued our interest as avid fans of the supernatural. Our journey began under the cheerful light of a clear blue sky, with backpacks loaded and spirits high. We followed the marked trails, laughing and sharing stories, completely at ease in each other's company. As experienced hikers, we felt confident in our abilities to handle the reputedly treacherous paths of Bell Rock. By late afternoon, we reached a designated campsite nestled by a serene lake, surrounded by towering pines that swayed gently in the wind. After setting up camp, we gathered around the fire, where Chris, the storyteller of our group, decided to delve into the spooky history of the area. They say that long ago, this part of the forest was home to a reclusive sect that practiced strange rituals. One night, their chants awoke something ancient and malevolent in the woods. Chris narrated, his voice lowering to a dramatic whisper. They were never seen again, but hikers sometimes report eerie voices and ghostly lights among the trees. We teased Chris about his flair for the dramatic, but as darkness enveloped the woods, a sense of unease began to settle over our group. The night was unusually quiet. No crickets chirped, and there was no rustling of small animals. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Unable to shake the eerie feeling, we retreated into our tents, the silence of the forest pressing heavily against the fabric walls. Sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke to a faint whispering sound. It seemed to echo through the trees, a soft sibilant voice calling out from the darkness. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard Jenna whisper from her tent, "Do you guys hear that?" Alex and Chris murmured their assents, their voices tinged with fear. We unzipped our tents and peered out into the moonlit night. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to surround us, swirling in the wind that had suddenly picked up. "Let's stick together," I said as we huddled close by the dying fire. The temperature had dropped sharply, and a mist began to rise from the lake, creeping towards us like a living thing. As the mist enveloped our campsite, the whispering abruptly stopped. In its place came a deep, resonant growl that vibrated through the ground. Fear rooted us to the spot. Then, out of the swirling fog, we saw it. A shadowy figure, large and imposing, its eyes glinting red in the firelight. The figure moved towards us, and as it did, Alex screamed. Something had grabbed him from behind. We turned to see another figure, smaller but just as terrifying, clutching Alex with long, claw-like hands. In a panic, we scattered, running blindly into the fog. I heard Chris shout my name, but his voice was cut off by a sudden, ghastly shriek that echoed through the forest. Heart pounding, I ran until I tripped over a root and fell hard to the ground. As I looked up, I saw the larger figure looming over me, its face a grotesque mask of rage and hunger. Just as it reached down, an arrow whistled through the air, striking the creature in the chest. It staggered back, howling in pain and anger. Scrambling to my feet, I ran back towards the campsite, where Jenna was firing arrows from her compound bow, her face set in a determined grimace. We managed to fend off the creatures long enough to regroup and make a plan. With dawn breaking, the creatures retreated into the mist, which slowly began to dissipate. We found Chris, badly injured but alive, hidden among some bushes where he had crawled after being attacked. With Alex also wounded, but able to walk, we quickly packed up our gear and began the painful trek back to civilization, constantly looking over our shoulders. The sun had never been more welcome as it rose fully over the horizon, casting away the shadows of the night. But we knew something had changed. The forest had marked us, and as we helped each other down the mountain, each step was haunted by the memory of the night's terror, and the knowledge that something malevolent had awakened in Bellrock. The hike back to civilization was excruciating. Chris's injuries were severe, a deep gash along his arm and numerous scratches that suggested he had been dragged across the rocky forest floor. Alex wasn't much better off. One of his ankles was badly sprained, and his back was marked with what looked like claw marks. Every step was a reminder of the night's horrors, each rustle in the woods a potential signal of another attack. We reached the outskirts of a small town by mid-morning, the local clinic becoming our sanctuary. As the doctor tended to Chris and Alex, Jenna and I recounted our ordeal to a skeptical sheriff. He listened, nodding occasionally, his expression unreadable. Folks around these parts know to steer clear of the Bellrock area, he finally said, his voice low. We've had reports, missing hikers, strange sightings, never anything concrete, just rumors. You're lucky to be alive. His words did little to comfort us. As we waited for news on Chris and Alex's condition, Jenna and I pieced together our own theory. The creatures, the legends, the attack. It was as if we'd stumbled upon a forgotten piece of the world, a slice of ancient wilderness that didn't play by modern rules. Chris was stable, but needed to stay overnight for observation. Alex was given a crutch and a stern warning to rest. We booked a room at a local motel, the events of the past 24 hours weighing heavily on us. That night, as we tried to sleep, the silence was oppressive. Every creak and whisper of the motel's old structure sent shivers down my spine. Jenna, ever the protector, kept watch, her eyes scanning the dimly lit parking lot outside our window. "Do you think they could follow us here?" she whispered at some point. I didn't answer. The truth was, I felt it too. The eerie sensation of not being alone, of being watched by unseen eyes. Morning brought no relief. We were greeted with the news that another hiker had gone missing in the Bellrock area. The sheriff's face was grim as he advised us to head home and forget we ever stopped in their town. The drive back was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own fears. The landscape around us, once beautiful, now seemed menacing, filled with hidden dangers. When we finally reached our city, the relief was palpable, but the shadow of Bellrock followed us. Alex quit hiking and sold his gear. Jenna threw herself into her work, her nights consumed by research into cryptids and ancient legends. Chris, once healed, moved away, unable to face the forest trails that once brought him peace. As for me, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, of being haunted by what we saw. My dreams were filled with shadowy figures and the sound of a deep resonant growl. I saw therapists, spoke to experts in paranormal phenomena, even visited mediums. Nothing helped. The last time I saw Jenna, she had bags under her eyes and a stack of old books on local folklore. "There's something out there," she insisted, her voice urgent, "something ancient, and it's not done with us." She was right. One evening, as I walked home, the familiar crackle of dry leaves underfoot sent a chill up my spine. I turned, expecting to see a follower, a mugger, anything human. Instead, I saw it, a shadow at the edge of my vision, too quick to be natural. I ran like I hadn't, since that night in the mountains. By the time I reached my door, gasping for air, I dared a glance behind. Nothing, just the empty street.